Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Could we get the slides teed up here when you guys get a chance? Great. I'm Robert Bernard. I'm the Chief Environmental Strategist at Microsoft. And my team and I, our role is we wake up every day and think about this issue, which is how do we empower every person, organization, and also species on the planet to thrive in a resource-constrained world. And so for us, we're acutely aware that we sit at the intersection of two ages, and one of them, of course, is what are we doing to the planet? And that's why all of you are here. It's great to see so many people. I've been doing this job for about 10 years, and when I first started, if we had 5 or 10 people in the audience, that was considered a significant volume of people. And I would go around the world and I'd talk about this issue, and I would say that the world wasn't awake. But today, most of the world and most of the planet is awake on this issue, which is we have a problem in every city, in every country, across multiple areas that I'll talk about. And what we've seen over the last few years is a growing awareness of the severity, the breadth, and the depth of the problems. So whether that's around climate and climate change, whether it's around water, we need 40% more water than the planet currently has for fresh water to grow food and to actually provide water for our society around the globe within the next 20 years. So how do you possibly get 40% more fresh water than we currently have on the planet? This is one of the questions we think about. And so we have this unbelievable change in perception and reality, and we know that our systems, whether it's arable land or water or climate change or pollution or energy systems, are not sufficient to meet the needs that we have as a society. Now, the other thing that's happening, though, is that we sit at this intersection of the Anthropocene, the changes on the planet, and the fourth industrial revolution, which is really the rise of artificial intelligence, cloud computing, sensor-based networks. And so we've seen tremendous changes in our industry in the last 3 to 4 years that we are now thinking in my team and across Microsoft, which is how do we take these revolutions that are happening in technology and apply them to Earth's ecosystems? So in July, Microsoft launched a big AI push in the UK. We actually announced this. But we think that we are going to transform every single thing we do in the way we live. And so I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about some examples of how we actually apply these to the Earth systems, because we need better and more data. And then we need to take the tools and the technologies that we use every single day around business and business models to transform. Now, one of the things that is very, I'd call it a combination of both frustrating and exciting, is the pace of change that is needed. So when I talk to people, and like I said, I've been doing this job for 10 years, people tend to think linearly. We need a 5% improvement, a 10% improvement. And what I'm here to talk about today, if you don't take anything else away, is that it is not about a 5% or a 10% improvement. It's about a 10x and a 100x improvement. Because without that speed of change, we will fail to accomplish what we need to do, which is apply technology of the modern age to the problems of our planet. Now, when I look back, this was my first cell phone. I've been doing, like I said, this job for 10 years. This is about 20, 25 years old, and you can do the currency translations. My first phone was $1,500 US, and my first monthly cell phone bill, and I had a big tank basically in the trunk of my car, which would allow me to transmit. It cost me $800 in the first month to have my cell phone, and there was pretty much nobody I could talk to except for somebody with a landline. And if I wanted to do video, I could actually have a VCR, right? And so when we think about changes, of course, every one of us in our pockets today has computing. Every single one of us. Yet if we had sat here 30 years ago or 25 years ago and I had said, look, within 25 years, your whole life will be transformed. Everything you do, including calling an Uber, would happen with the touch of a button, people would have thought we were nuts. Today, I can get a phone that I can submerge in water, or I can get a phone for about $25 in a developing nation that will allow me to connect with the rest of the world. So this is the speed of change that we need, not just in our commercial environments, but in the planet's ecosystems. So earlier this summer, we launched a program for my team, which is really looking at how do we apply artificial intelligence to the Earth systems. And it's called AI for Earth. And we're focused on agriculture, water, biodiversity, and of course, climate change. Now, Because we only have a few minutes here today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of these areas. But if you don't take anything else away from the next 10 minutes or so, we are committed to this issue at scale. And so I'm going to give my email is rbernard@Microsoft, and you can find me through the Web Summit app. We have put forward grants and other programs that are accessible to anybody here who has ways and ideas of how we can apply artificial intelligence to Earth's ecosystems. I'm going to give you a couple of examples to hopefully spur in your mind, oh, okay, that's kind of what they're thinking about. But if you think of something that we're not talking about, we're even more interested, because it's really about taking the transformation and the digital opportunities that are happening in our sector and applying them to these issues. So we're interested in increasing access, grants to research, grants to scientists, grants to our cloud computational programs. Education, we're hosting summits to educate people on artificial intelligence and Earth's ecosystems. And we want to do innovation, and I'll talk a little bit about what these are. So the first thing you need to do if you want to actually solve problems on the Earth is to understand the Earth. So the way land cover mapping works today is state-of-the-art is basically I can do what's called 30-meter resolution images. So what that would mean is, while you and I can look at an aerial photo and say, oh, that's a house, that's a tree, that's a curb, that's a sewer drain, that's a deciduous tree, that's an evergreen tree, what a computer sees is a blob. And at 30 meters, think about basically a little bit more than half the size of a football pitch. That's the level of resolution. Even though you and I can see it, our computers and cloud computing does not. So if you wanted to take an image like something like this and you wanted to code it, and we did this in the Chesapeake Bay, which is on the east coast of the United States. And they had spent, with modern tools, they had taken a process that used to take about 3 years. And by coding, it's called annotation. You annotate the images. You can get down to 1 meter resolution today if you have about $1 million and about 18 months. We've done this in the Puget Sound. We've done it in the Chesapeake. We've seen it in multiple areas. Now, the transformation happens is when we start to train the machines, so the same way a machine could recognize my face and your face and say, oh, that's Rob, that's so-and-so, and we can use artificial intelligence to do that. What if we could apply that same technology to high-resolution land cover mapping? So we basically took the images that were sitting in the Chesapeake Bay, and we trained our algorithm, and something that had taken 18 months and $1 million could now be done in a matter of minutes. So when I talk about transformation and not 5% or 20%, but 10x and 100x, these are the kinds of things with artificial intelligence that will allow us to understand what's happening on our planet so we can start to figure out how to do better land use planning, water conservation, and other issues. Now, the second area that we're looking at is in agriculture. So how many people here have heard of precision agriculture? Right? We're gonna sensor up our farms. There's a little bit of a problem, which is how many farms are sitting in high Wi-Fi or high 4G network areas around the world? The answer is not very many. So it's great, I can go put a sensor in my farm, but good luck getting the data out of the farm. Oh, and by the way, if I don't have a lot of money, and 80% in some countries, 80% of the people in those countries do subsistence agriculture. So the reality is, although we theoretically think we can get data in and out of a farm, the reality is very, very different. And so what we've done, this researcher has basically said, look, we can use what's called TV white spaces, which is unused broadband spectrum, and we can transmit high-resolution data at 10-kilometer hops. And you can do it with just a little bit of a solar cell. And we want to get to the point where we can take every farm around the world and make it connected. And when you do that, and we've done this in places in India and Africa and also in the United States, you see a 20% increase often in yields. And the other thing is, people go, hey, I want to be able to get aerial images of my farm. Well, that's great if you have a drone and you have the money to fly a drone and you have the infrastructure to actually charge your drone. But the reality for most farmers is they don't have the capacity to do this, they don't have the funding to do it, they don't have the infrastructure. So one of our scientists actually said, well, what if we just used a helium balloon, we floated it above the farm, and then we just basically hung a camera from a cell phone in it. Now, the problem, of course, is your cell phone's going like this in the wind. So we had to use some algorithms to stitch it together. But we've now created a technology which allows us to look from the sky. So if we take the first thing with high-resolution land cover mapping, we say, OK, here's what we see on the ground broadly at 1 meter resolution. Now we float your camera above it. We get high telemetry. and we add that with what's actually happening on the ground, we can look at how do you transform resource use in agriculture at a scale that's never been done before. Like I said, we have a number of pilots around the world where we're doing this right now, and we are looking to take the price point for our first farm was about $8,000. We want to take that down by 2 magnitudes of order so that for less than $100, any farmer anywhere in the world can transform the way they do agriculture by leveraging data and modern technology, regardless of where they are. Now, a third area that we're applying artificial intelligence is this thing here called Project Premonition. So today, we know that we think there are about 10 million species on the planet. Most of those have not been cataloged. And the problem we have is if we want to protect species and we think they're going extinct at 1,000 times the natural rate of extinction and 100 times the rate that's required to sustain human life. Yet we don't understand the majority of species on the planet. And with today's technology, this is how we track animals with collars. We hope they run in front of cameras that we've placed on trees and in areas around the world. It'll take potentially 500 years to catalog all the species on the planet. How many people here think we have 500 years to figure out what's going on the planet for our species? So this is a problem, which is if we want to protect our species, we actually have to understand where are the species, what is the risk to them, and how does it work? So what this Project Premonition does is it starts with this trap. It says, what if I can turn nature into a sensor for nature? And the way it works is it emits some CO2, ironically, which is an attractant, but it emits carbon, has blue lights, and it attracts insects to the trap. Now, on this trap, it actually has infrared cameras and auditory listening devices. And we can train it to look for any species of insect. And the reason that's really interesting when you want to think about something like biodiversity, which is if I know that this given mosquito stings this given species of mammal, or any animal, I can train this trap with artificial intelligence to look for those mosquitoes. A mosquito will fly in. If it's got infrared sensors, it'll actually see, oh, that mosquito has blood in its abdomen, that mosquito does not. We're going to record every single insect that comes in and out of the trap. This one has actually blood in its system, we're going to trap it. Now the issue is when the trap starts to get full, it'll send us a signal, and what we'll do is we'll take that back to a lab and we'll say, we want to know how many of each individual species that exist in this ecosystem because we don't really know. Today's modern approach to tracking many animals is literally the same as it was 50 years ago. You put people up in planes, you put people out in the field, you give them binoculars. You have field cameras, but even then you're dependent on all sorts of luck. The animals walking in the right place at the right time of day. Turns out we know very little. But by doing this, we can take the blood in an insect, and within 3 hours, we can run it against every known species on the planet. And we can look at the blood and all the DNA signatures, and we can start to say, look at all the different mammals or other types of animals that we're finding in this region. Now, the second knock-on effect is all the insects that we didn't trap. So I'm just going to take a step back for a second and say, okay, so we have high-resolution imaging that says, here's what's happening in this ecosystem from a visual standpoint. We are now able to do that not on 18-month cycles for $1 million, but nearly instantaneously as soon as we can acquire the images. I can actually put sensors in the ground and I can get data up on what's happening there. And now I can actually use with DNA and mosquitoes a much better sense of what's happening. But I'm also recording every insect activity and every pollinator activity that's happening in the ecosystem. So now we're starting to say, how do we take all these individual artificial intelligence technologies and stitch them together so that we have a much more interesting and holistic view of what's happening on our planet? So I want to ask and challenge you is, where do we go next? If we have a better understanding with high-resolution land cover mapping, if we have a better understanding of what's happening with our farm beats in terms of farm technology and we can get data in and out, if we have a better understanding of what's happening with all the insect species in a given area, how do we actually take this to the next step? So one of the things we're doing is we're actually putting out these calls for grants. They're called AI for Earth grants. If you go to Microsoft's website and you just look for AI for Earth, you'll find them. And we want to understand what's happening. We just put one out for oceans, AI for oceans. And so I invite all of you, again, you can find me on the Web Summit app. My email is rbernard@Microsoft. We need to transform the pace at which we're reinventing the way we use resources. We can't continue to have 1,000 times the extinction rate that is natural and expected. We need to figure out how do we get 40% more water in a world where only 1% of our fresh water is available, 1% of the water on the earth is available to us, but we can't do it without innovation at scale. Now, I said that this is our team's mission, right? Empower every person and organization to thrive in a resource-constrained world. But one thing that's been incredibly promising for me is as I travel around the world and I see like those two guys who invented Project Premonition, who are in their early 30s, or the folks in the Chesapeake who figured out new ways to actually do high-resolution land cover mapping, or the Microsoft researcher who decided, hey, I can apply these issues to agriculture. There is one resource that is not constrained, and that's you guys. It's human ingenuity. And so we desperately need all of you, and any of you who have ideas, to help us figure out how to take all the amazing advances that are happening in artificial intelligence and apply them to the Earth's ecosystem. That is needed desperately, and we are ready to work with you in any way we possibly can. Thank you very much for your time.